Hi everybody. There are a lot of interesting neighborhoods in Boston. Beacon Hill is one that's quite charming, quite old, and one of the squares in it is called Louisbourg Square. But it got its name from a battle men from New England fought in that wasn't part of the Revolution. It was part of King George's War in the 1740s, when men from New England fought as part of the British Empire. So it was this date in 1745, June 17, that the New England militia were instrumental in the victory over the French at Fort Louisbourg up in Nova Scotia. And one thing about Louisbourg Square today, it's one of many places in Boston that didn't change their name after the Revolution and kept the English name from when we were all loyal Englishmen. As you can see, it's possible to go across the North Atlantic from France or Britain to the maritime provinces of Canada. And fishermen were doing that already in the 1600s in boats like this. And one of the reasons they were doing that was because there was a lot of fish to catch. Now, the native peoples of Maine and New Brunswick, Nova Scotia had already established a fishing industry, and the Europeans learned from the natives how to dry fish so they could transport it back to Europe, which they did for pretty good profit. So this was a pretty big deal in the 1600s into the 1700s. And I commend this book to you if this interests you. Lizzie Collingham writes about how the British search for other foods led to the establishment of their empire. It's pretty fascinating. So by the time we get to our story, you can see up in the Newfoundland area that there's some purple and blue. The purple was disputed between the British and the French, and you'll notice Louisbourg in that little blue island up there. Over in Europe, we have the War of Austrian Succession, and this had to do with who was going to control Silesia, which is sort of Poland. In the United States area, it was known as King George's War, and you can see Louisbourg again in the upper right, other forts that the French had and the British had, so there was a lot of tension. So in March of 1745, the British Navy left Boston with about 90 ships and 4,000 men, and they headed up to Louisbourg, and they besieged it from the sea. But the fort was not well defended from the land side. So here you see the Colonial militia coming in from the back, moving cannon and such. So they were able to be victorious over the French. So it's still there today, Fort Louisbourg. I've not been, we've not been, but it'd be fun to visit there sometime. So over in Boston, north of the Common, we have Louisbourg Square. And if you look a few blocks north of the Common, you can see that green rectangle. And this is what Louisbourg Square looks like. It's very Victorian. Charles Dickens loved visiting here, for instance. But there are other places in Boston that remind us that Boston was once part of the empire. The old State House has the royal lion on the left and the unicorn on the right. So those are still there, even though we're not part of the empire anymore. When the Englishmen first came to the Shawmut Peninsula, they called it Tri-Mountain because of three hills that were basically where the Common is today. They changed the name to Boston, but Tri-Mountain is maintained in this street sign where we see Tremont Street, Tremont. And then the Georges, George III was the king during the Revolution, they were from the House of Hanover. And Hanover Street, you see the sign here, is the main street of the North End, and that retains the name of the House of Hanover. So in Boston you see things like Paul Revere here in the North Church, and you think of the Revolution. But Bostonians were also Englishmen, and Louisbourg Square is one of the reminders of that. So history has lots of layers, doesn't it? And that's part of the fun of studying it.